Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Kenton Hornbeck, co-host of the BeckDeck podcast, joined alongside Logan Decker as usual. We got a big pod today. We got free agency in the NFL. We have another segment related to what we did last week in terms of pick'ems for NFL players. And then finally, we're talking Iran at the end of it. That should be interesting. Logan, how are we doing this week, man?
I'm doing fantastic, man. The weather's been great down here. I've been able to go to the golfing range a little bit more. Hung out with some coworkers yesterday for a birthday and bowling. I'm atrocious at bowling and I'm atrocious at golf, so golf's getting better. Bowling's just going to be stuck. But it's been a good week. How about you, man?
Pretty good. I actually also made it out to the driving range in Fort Wright the other day. I played 18, or I guess I played 9 on the simulator with Dakota Crouch, and actually played pretty decent for me. I finished with like a 45 or something like that, nice. But still figuring out my driver. I can shave some strokes off. I'm pretty happy, but the weather up here has been very bipolar. We also have kind of interesting, maybe a work announcement, but Trump is coming to Northern Kentucky next week. He's going to be in Hebron, and I'm trying to see if I can get in that to cover it. That'll be really interesting. But besides that, the weather's been a little nicer. Hopefully it doesn't rain so much, but it is what it is.
Yeah, man. I feel that. I talk to my dad every week, and he does a lot of outside work, and I constantly get weather updates from what's going on up there. And as soon as it warms up for you all, it starts to rain.
Yep.
So it's tough. But we didn't come here to play weatherman today. Like you said, we're going to start off with the NFL free agency news. And I guess the best way to do this, at least my list is concerning, I'm picking guys, or I'm mentioning guys that I think are a little bit more relevant in terms of like, hey, we know their contract, we know what the trades are, that kind of thing. Because there's some guys that have definitely been signed that have not been big names. And they'll come out like, oh, here's a 1-year extension, a 1-year re-sign, whatever it is, and they haven't even told the money yet. And stuff will come out about that as we push along, especially probably by tomorrow once free agency truly opens up. You know, at this point, this was just kind of trades and re-signs, and then it's basically all out tomorrow at 12 o'clock. Where we get to see a lot of changes in the NFL, and I'm excited for that. It's going to be a very busy day, a lot of good news, and I'm sure there's a bunch of deals that have already been set in place that just have to wait till noon tomorrow. I guess, I'm going to go off the NFL tracker. They do a really good job on their website, surprisingly. They base it off of divisions. So now I'm not trying to go in any order of precedence in terms of a trade. We're going to talk about all the big ones, big extensions, whatnot. But I think one of the bigger ones that came up, we'll start off with the AFC East, was with the Buffalo Bills, who decided to trade their second-round pick this year to get DJ Moore, wide receiver for the Bears, and a fifth-round pick in this year's draft. So just right out of the gate, what was your reaction when you heard this news?
I really liked the trade for Buffalo. I thought it was a good move. It signals to me that Chicago is looking to get Rome Odunze more touches, get him more involved. And I think, in my opinion, Stephon Diggs was better and is better, maybe not anymore, than DJ Moore. But I think DJ Moore is more reliable mentally. And I think, especially playing in cold weather in Chicago and getting a little used to that, he's going to be able to translate well for Josh Allen. I think it's a good move for Buffalo. So I was pretty pleasantly surprised for them, and I would also be pleasantly surprised if I was a Bills fan. What about you?
I like the trade for both teams. I think DJ Moore for a second-round pick and getting a fifth back in return, that's pretty solid. When we've seen some of these wide receiver trades in the past few years just, really hurt some teams if they don't have the best outcome possible. I think DJ Moore is a very solid wide receiver. I'm not one of those people that argues. I think he is a number one. He's just not the superstar number one. He's one of those guys that I've followed through the most of his career just because, I'll be honest, part of it's fantasy football. And how many years have I had DJ Moore on my team because I'm like, well, he's the number one in Carolina. So it's happened multiple years, and he definitely showed that he's still got it with Chicago. I just think part of it is that throughout the season, at least I would hear that him and Ben Johnson just did not click that well. Whatever the reasons may be, he never got blown up on social media, but it was just something that I would consistently hear throughout the season. And you're right with Romadunze there, and Burden being there. They got a young wide receiver core, and it's like, hey, let's let them develop. They got their 2 tight end head monster as well. So it was like, okay, what can we do to potentially open up some cap room? So they trade DJ Moore, free up the cap there. They get a second-round pick back. And this past weekend, we heard the news, and I should have wrote his name down, but I believe their center, who is maybe 28, 29 years old, decided to retire. So maybe this is a move for them to get some extra draft capital to shore up this offensive line after they just made all the moves the previous year, to make sure that Caleb Williams has as much time as possible to do some magic and help develop the 2 young wide receivers, and Loveland. And I think it's a good move for both because Buffalo definitely needed, although I like Khalil Shakur, some of the other weapons on that offense were either underperforming or just like Dalton Kincaid. Hey, he's a great talent, but he'd play 2 games, get hurt 2 games, play 2 games. They needed somebody more consistent to help Josh Allen out, which is kind of, when you look at it, Buffalo last year was number 1 rushing offense in the league, and James Cook is a phenomenal talent. Josh Allen is obviously a phenomenal runner of the ball as well, but when they would run into a defense that would shut down the run, which we had saw multiple times, where if they went up against a very, very good rushing defensive front, that oftentimes Buffalo's rushing attack would fail them. And that's what we saw with Denver going into the playoffs there. They were able to shut them down, made Josh Allen uncomfortable, and make very poor decisions. And they need a guy that's solid, consistent. And as long as DJ Moore, he probably had the most criticism he's had in his entire career last year, in terms of, let's just say, his laziness on certain routes. It didn't look like he was going full go. I think this is a fresh move for DJ Moore. He's going to be playing with the best quarterback he's ever played with. It's a good move for both teams. And then the Bills, they did make a pretty notable, I wouldn't say it's a shockwave, throughout the league, but they did re-sign their center, Connor McGovern, who's a very, very good center, 4-year, $52 million. And they also extended their safety, Sam Fankleong, for a 3-year deal. So they're keeping the guys that they like. Connor McGovern is a well-respected center in the league. He's a solid piece for the interior of that offensive line. Great move for them. And then I was going to let you, if you want to talk more about the Bills, by all means, but I was going to jump over to the Jets.
Yeah, let's
just keep it moving then. All right, so the Jets, of course, and we talked about this gentleman last week with Breece Hall, as I stand for his talent, and of course the Jets will not let him out of hell, and they decided to franchise tag him, which is for $14.3 million. So that tells you how much the Jets value this man on their team. They also re-signed tight end Jelani Wood, who's a depth piece for him, and then they made a trade with my team for a fantastic young guy, defensive tackle Devondre Sweat, and they traded up one of their edge pieces from the Sauce Gardner draft, Jermaine Johnson. So that trade, because it's involving my team, I don't know exactly how I feel about it, just because the Jets just need help in general, and I guess, hey, we need to shore up the middle of the line, especially with them making the trade last year with Dallas to get rid of Williams. So Devondre Sweat makes sense. Very good young defensive tackle, big guy, athletic, strong. Just he's going to be a name. It just sucks that, hey, he's not going to be on some of these premier teams. And then Jermaine Johnson has been very productive. So it's one of those where coming into the draft for Tennessee, I really wanted them to take an edge rusher, and then they make this trade, and now I'm like, well, what do we do now? Do we just continue to stack that defensive line, or are we going a different direction? But as of right now, it's the Jets are franchise tag, and they made a small move to basically change one piece of their defensive line, and we'll have to wait and see what they do next. But what's your reaction to the franchise tag and the trade?
I understand why they franchise tagged Breece Hall. I would love to see them get him the ball more. I don't really have too strong of opinions on what the Jets have done so far. Obviously, a lot's still going to shake out once free agency actually starts on the 11th, I believe. But to me, the Jets just need so many pieces. I believe they'll probably be better next year. Not incredibly better, but, trending in the right direction if, things kind of break right. As far as the trade goes, I mean, congratulations on Jermaine Johnson. It looks like Tennessee is at least targeting, Robert Saleh, new coach of the Titans, used to coach the Jets, probably pretty
this
infamously.
Was a solid move.
This is a get his guy type of deal, bolster that locker room, bolster the defensive front or the edge. So I think that's a good move for Tennessee. Tennessee is probably going to start looking more like a normal franchise again in conducting offseason, moves. Over the past couple of years, it was very confusing to follow any sort of strategy. It seemed really haphazard or random even. So to see Saleh get in there and make a move for one of his guys, I think is good. The Jets, taking it back to them, they need so much help that anything that retains any level of talent is probably good for New York.
Yeah, I mean, both of these teams are far away from making some noise this year, in my opinion. So we'll have to see how each guy performs on each team in their new homes now. We're going to move on to the AFC North, which you could make the argument that the Ravens might have made the biggest trade this past week, trading for multi-time All-Pro defensive end pass rusher Max Crosby from Las Vegas, giving Vegas the 2016 14th overall pick and the 2017 first overall pick. This is in a landscape where we're both originally in the AFC North growing up, and this is the Ravens fans are absolutely excited about this. He's a phenomenal pass rusher. You could put him in the argument that he's a top 5 pass rusher in the league, like soundly, and I don't think anybody would argue with you on it. With him being on the front four there, them having Kyle Hamilton over the top and Roquan Smith leading that linebacker core, I'm hoping, and I'm sure they are too, that this defensive unit is going to get re-energized, get some juice in it where they can have phenomenal stars at each level of their defense. And then in terms of the Raiders here, it was going to happen. We knew it was. He was unhappy with how the coaching staff went about the turnover change, which has happened multiple times in the past few years. And Max gets a chance to be on a roster that can win a Super Bowl, has the potential to win a Super Bowl every year now. And the Raiders they're needing the picks. They need the picks to help out because we're all going to assume that they're going to take quarterback at number 1 overall. And they whether that's on the offensive line or whether that's getting him receiving help or stacking up that defense, whatever it might be, the Raiders need the picks. So makes sense on both sides. I'm really curious to see. The one thing I haven't looked at is what the Ravens cap situation looks like now with this. But I'm sure they're able to restructure and make everything work on their end and not lose any key pieces in the process.
I liked the move for Baltimore. I thought it was savvy and also aggressive. With them changing coaching or head coaching roles with Jesse Minter, who's now coming in, I think this is the type of move that sets a precedent within your organization. Hey, we're still willing to go out there and compete. We had a certain regime in for a certain amount of time. It ran its course. It felt mundane and sometimes just boring and predictable, even with a lot of dynamic players. You come in and your team immediately goes and gets one of the best pass rushers in the league. I think that's a great move. I also think Max Crosby is going to fit in really well in Baltimore for various reasons. We don't need to get into that, but I think it's going to work out for him in that locker room. I think for the Raiders, they need, like the Jets, so much help that this is a win. They were able to come away with, I believe, 2 first-round picks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So similar to the Colts Sauce Gardner move, which doesn't look as great in hindsight, I do think this is a better move than that trade because Max is just more impactful than Sauce Gardner, in my opinion. But with the Raiders specifically, they also have a new coaching staff. Last year they had Pete Carroll. They're coming in with Clint Kubiak, who was with Seattle, coming off a Super Bowl win as their offensive coordinator. They're looking to draft Fernando Mendoza at number 1 overall. At least we believe they are. So getting rid of one of your top edge rushers and also a guy who was unhappy in the locker room, kind of a holdover from previous regimes, even prior to Pete Carroll, like Antonio Pierce. He was a vocal leader in the locker room. I don't think he would have meshed with kind of what the Raiders are moving toward, especially with Fernando Mendoza. He kind of seems more like a happy-go-lucky kind of plucky leader, somebody guys can rally behind, and Max Crosby's got more of an edge to him. I think he's going to fit in well with a team that's already established, such as Baltimore. And I do want to bring this up, and we may talk about them in a second, but my gosh, this whole division has, besides one team, has absolute stud edge rushers. I mean, good Lord. And that's what the AFC North historically is. You have Myles Garrett, who is arguably the best player in the league, maybe in Cleveland. He just set the sacks record. Now you have Max Crosby in Baltimore leading their defensive pass rush. And then you have TJ Watt, who may be aging out a little bit, but is still incredibly productive, an incredibly viable player over there in Pittsburgh, still one of the best pass rushers in the league. And then you have Cincinnati with me and you at pass rush. So we'll get to them in a second. But I think if all things are equal, good move for Baltimore, forward-thinking move for Vegas. I think it's a pretty good trade, both parties involved.
Not to interrupt this segment, but I just had this thought pop in my head when you're mentioning Myles Garrett and how impactful his career has been with Cleveland, but just in the NFL as a whole. If he were to continue on this trajectory, which I don't see any reason why he would not, do you think that him or Jim Brown would be the Cleveland Brown?
I think it's Jim Brown. It has to be. I think Jim Brown is probably one of the 5 greatest football players to ever step on a field, even if you account for era. However, I understand the argument you're making. I think Cleveland fans would probably opt toward Jim Brown because the Browns, as a franchise, were in the mix. They were kind of winning more so back in those days, which I believe was the 50s. I think it was the 50s. Maybe it was the 60s. I can't quite remember. But they had guys. They were pretty good. Now the Browns are more or less mediocre to below average typically. They've had a couple seasons sprinkled in there where they've made a wild card run. But I will say this. Myles Garrett is a Hall of Fame football player. He's one of the most physically dominant football players that I've ever seen in my entire life. And I saw, and I know you've probably seen this clip also, as well as many in our audience. So you may know, like us, Micah Parsons is also a podcaster, and he was interviewing Myles Garrett one-on-one. And Myles, his body language during this conversation was very calm, very relaxed, in his element. Micah Parsons, who's a physically dominant defensive player too. Now he's in Green Bay, just coming off an injury. Green Bay's pretty good. he was kind of chirping at Myles Garrett, saying like, well, I'm a better player than you, essentially. And Myles Garrett's sitting back like, kind of like, at what? Like, how are you? I just set the sacks record. Like, what are we even talking about right now? It's like, you're good, bro, but I'm Myles Garrett. And that's kind of the way I feel about it, is a lot of these guys are good, and maybe in a vacuum, is Myles Garrett so much better than TJ Watt or, Micah Parsons, which I do think he's way better than Micah Parsons. But is he so much better? No. But at this point in time, he's been so dominant for such a long time. He's essentially carrying their defense. I've watched so many Bengals games where he just like effortlessly glides to the quarterback and just stuffs Joe Burrow. So to me, he's probably one of the 5 to 7 best defensive players of the 21st century.
Yeah, I just bring this up because I just pulled up these stats. So Myles Garrett is currently tied with Dwight Freeney at 20th NFL all time, and he's got 125.5. And let's say, and this is a high number, but it's possible. Let's say Myles Garrett gets 20 sacks next season. Okay, he would go from 20th to 6th NFL all time, jumping over Michael Strahan. And leaders Bruce Smith with 200 sacks. So this is what I'm saying, if he were to stay healthy and stay productive, there's a very legitimate chance that he could be the all-time sack leader in the NFL. It's a heavy goal, but just like comparing to some of his counterparts, and I know I've just derailed the whole free agency talk, and I apologize.
No, we can always
for
jump
that.
back into that.
But even, like, let's just say Cameron Jordan, who's an active player ahead of him, from 2011 to 25, has 132 sacks. And he's been playing, he's got 6 years on Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett's going to pass him up most likely this year. Von Miller, same time frame, 2011, 25. He's got 138 and a half. Myles Garrett's probably going to pass him up next year. It's just what he's been able to do productivity-wise at this length in his career, which is another reason, you had mentioned TJ Watt, who is in the same draft class as Myles Garrett, is at 115 sacks. So he's only 10 sacks behind Myles Garrett. So there's potential, depending on health here, that both of these guys very may well finish in the top 10, top 5 potentially, if they have remarkably lengthy careers.
I think that's a really good point. It seems like Myles Garrett specifically, I don't know as much about TJ. TJ seems to get banged up a little more recently. But Myles Garrett, he seems like he takes really good care of his body. With the kind of athlete he is, with how heavy he is, but he's also like kind of lean. He's like flexible. He's good at, maintaining his athleticism as he ages. I think he's going to have, because of his size, a really impactful, he's going to be still impactful even well into his mid-30s. And I could see him winning at least another Defensive Player of the Year, especially on a Browns team where it kind of hinges around him. But I actually just looked up Myles Garrett, and we could talk about this at another time, but I did want to drop this little nugget that Myles Garrett has been floated in some trade rumors, and one team I keep seeing pop up is the reigning Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. So that could be something to keep an eye on. I think that would be quite a trade if they ended up pulling that off.
Max Crosby got 2 firsts. I would like to think that Myles Garrett would get more than that. What is the price? 2 firsts and a second, a third? Like,
I was probably thinking 2 firsts, a second, and maybe a player. But
yeah,
maybe that's too much. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard to say what is and what isn't too much if you're trading for a Hall of Famer in his physical prime coming off a Super Bowl win. So,
yeah, that would be wild if that happened. I have not heard those rumors. Yeah, that'd be crazy. All right, to get back on track here. Sorry for the derailment. It's just an interesting thought. we're going to stay in the AFC North. We're going to talk about our local Bengals, who I give them credit for the re-sign that they did do with off the guard Dalton Risner. They did also re-sign cornerback Jalen Davis, who's more of a depth piece. But Risner, he's the highest pass blocking grade according to PFF on the team with a 71. Now, do I know what the hell the number represents? No. PFF keeps everything under lock and key now. But it's very hard to get a higher number on that. Run block was ranked at 69, not total, but just the number that they gave him. To put that in perspective, if I'm comparing to maybe some other players out there, let's just say 77 is 17th out of 89 in terms of tackles. Now, guard's a different position, but my point is that Risner has played last season well. Not like a all pro or anything like that, but he's above average. He's the best piece on their offensive line, where other people have definitely failed. So they give him the 1-year deal. I don't know how much. Hasn't been reported just yet. Or at least when I had done the research for this, it has not been reported. But a good re-signing for him. They got to keep Burrow healthy, got to keep him upright. And keeping your best pass-blocking lineman is definitely one way to do that.
I'm with you. I think Dalton Risner, Dalton, however you pronounce his last name, was a really good player. He signed on right before the season started, and it did help their offensive line a lot. I know Joe Burrow still took some hits, but it was hard for me to put all the blame on the offensive line. You had Dylan Fairchild, who was coming in as a rookie. I believe they drafted him in the 3rd round. He proved to be a pretty valuable rookie, and I believe his trajectory keeps looking upward. He's going to be a fairly consistent piece for them. I still think, even with a pretty good offensive line, and when I say pretty good, I mean like compared to past year standards, I definitely don't think this is anywhere near. It may be they need an average to slightly above average unit, and I think they're going there because it was a bottom unit from everything I could tell. So they need continuity. They need veteran leadership on the line. They have Karras, Orlando Brown, Dalton Risner, Armarius Mims is in the mix. He was a pretty good player. And then they have Fairchild, as I mentioned earlier. I still feel like they could use depth on the line. If I was the Bengals, I would not be scared to go out and get a savvy veteran who's played in a bunch of big games. Go out there and get somebody who's going to fit right into that locker room, be a good piece, rotational piece. You could still bolster the line through the draft in your 4th, 5th round. Historically, the Bengals don't always hit, but what team does? I do think letting Trey Hendrickson go was the right move for the Bengals. It closes the book on this saga that ultimately became toxic toward the end of it. They should have traded him years ago. This is kind of what I was referring to last. And I know T. Higgins is locked in for the Bengals, and I'm not going to keep harping on T. Higgins because T. Higgins is good. But part of my rationale with the T. Higgins stuff kind of relates to the Trey Hendrickson contract stuff, is that the Bengals like to sign if middle-of-the-road kind of value guys. Trey Hendrickson became one of the best pass rushers in the league. He signed a mid-value contract, completely overperformed it, and that's why he was asking for more money. So if you're going to sign a middle-class free agent who is kind of underrated because he was coming off, I think, a 12-sack season for the Saints, and the Saints weren't very good. Maybe don't quote me on that, but I don't believe the Saints were whatever, and he had about 12 sacks. They signed him to a 3-year deal. It's like, prove it. Here's a bigger role if you can handle it. He handled it well. That's kind of the way the Bengals operate. And so if you're going to operate that way, just know that if this guy outperforms his contract and he's going to come knocking at the door and you're historically known as a cheapskate team, you may want to, unless you really want to pay this guy, which sometimes they're apprehensive, you may want to keep that, rotation open. You want to keep your mind open to trading some of these guys, but because they made the Super Bowl, the fans, etc. Everybody's very precious about this. But I think they could have really elongated some of this window that's been dormant for the past 3 years by holding on to these guys they should have gotten rid of and gotten capital for and opened up their cap, and kind of made things easier. Because if you're going to commit all this money to certain players, you have to be willing to move on of certain guys. You have to be willing to move off of them. So it doesn't mean all these dudes in free agency or the draft are going to hit. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The Bengals historically take some project players more so. Armarius Mims, he wasn't a home run after they drafted him in the first round. He played into his role as a pretty decent player. And I think when you look at the Bengals' offseason outlook, they need so much help. And I actually am optimistic that they're going to be able to fill a number of these open slots on their defense specifically pretty well. Brian Cook of Kansas City has been a guy I've seen linked to Cincinnati to take over one of their safety spots. They do have guys like Dax Hill, who is now well integrated into the Bengals locker room. He's a decent player. DJ Turner is another one. Again, these aren't the best players in the league at their position, but they are good pieces to have around, good depth pieces. Those are the guys you want in the mix constantly. What they need is some leaders back there, and they also need some home run hitters, which is why the draft is going to be so important to them. With moving off Trey Hendrickson, and I would like to get your take on this, is that Cincinnati now has a virtually invisible pass rush. They have Myles Murphy, who improved slightly last year. He was probably a bust up until he kind of saved a little bit of his reputation last year. But to me, they almost are locked in to a Reuben Bain now, unless they have a plan to address this offseason, which maybe they do. I'd rather them take a guy like Caleb Downs if he's going to be available, but there's a lot of moving pieces on the chessboard. What do you think about the Bengals pass rush situation in relation to their free agency outlook this offseason?
I mean, it's awful. I'm going to be honest with you. You have the more optimistic part of it. My whole thing with the Trey Hendrickson one, part of it was, I'm not going to dive into the T. Higgins thing, but if they're letting him walk now, if this was the thought process or in the back of your head at the slightest, why the hell don't you trade him and then get something back? Instead of letting him walk and be like, all right, instead of, 2 holes to fill in the defensive line or multiple holes to fill in the front seven, now we got to add one more. I don't understand the Bengals. They've always done this where they're not in the benefit of helping other teams. It's a trade. You are helping yourself out too. You're giving yourself the opportunity to make up for some of this deficit. You got a guy that wants to get paid. You don't want to necessarily bust the bank open for him. You give him a 1-year deal. This was the time to trade him. And you let him walk, and you get nothing for it. And now you're like, what do we do about the pass rush? That was basically non-existent last year, especially with Hendrickson being out for some games. It only showed you that this is arguably the weakest part of your entire team. And you let the one guy, and I understand, I'm not saying sign him for an extended time because he was getting a little bit up there in the age. And it's, when they first got him, you're right. He was a good player, not a great player. Gets this 3-year deal. Fantastic. Best possible outcome for the Bengals. And he shows out and he plays out. And they could have got a first-round pick for him. They could have got multiple picks trying to restock this up. This is what a good NFL franchise does. They recognize when players are going to fall off the cliff and they take the risk to trade, or they do it because they know the payday's coming up and they can't afford them, or whatever. Or you be like the Steelers and like, hey, we have a wide receiver that we know is going to blow up, in terms of toxicity. Let's get rid of him. Until recently they just trade for one with DK Metcalf, but that's besides the point. You can go down the list. But my point is that the Bengals are never, they always are one step too late to almost everything. And the only time that they consistently hit on stuff is when they are basically a top 5 pick in the draft, and you can't miss on that pick. Oh, A.J. Green. Oh, with Joe Burrow, with Jamar Chase. I'm like, yeah, you're supposed to hit on those because they are that uber talented. But then as soon as you put the Bengals in a mid-tier finish, oh, we got the 18th overall pick. And then you watch them just consistently blow these picks. Where it's like, we're going to take a project. I'm like, you don't take a project in the first round when you're a playoff hopeful team. Take a guy that can help you right now. Don't take a guy that has had 1 sack in his last year in college. It's stupid. It's idiotic. I can't think of another team, another franchise that drafts like this. At least the Jets draft well. They just can't ever assemble a team, and then they just end up trading them all later. All these other, I really can't think of another franchise that just consistently shoots themselves in the foot more when they have something special there. And it's like, all right, here we go. How many? So, yeah, you got me on my little tangent now because it is frustrating, and I'm sure Bengals fans share this passion. I'm just not a Bengals fan. I'm just looking at this as an outsider. But it's just, you guys have something special, and your front office can't pull their head out of their asses. I don't understand it.
The Bengals are a very reactive franchise as opposed to a proactive franchise. Like you were mentioning, they're always doing something too little, too late, and they squander the opportunity, which is why I was saying and beating the drum for, if a team is willing to give you legitimate draft capital for T. Higgins to make him their number 1 wide receiver, you need to seriously look at doing that. Now, I understand placating Joe. I understand all of that. T. Higgins is a good player. He's still, he caught 10 touchdowns. He had about 900 yards. So it's not like, oh, you just have to move off of this guy because he outperformed his allotted expectation that I gave him. You don't always have to do that. They kept him. It's fine, but they still went 6-11. You need so many more pieces than just a number 2 wide receiver. You know what I mean? And it's just stuff like that. When I see these mid-tier guys, which is what he is, people, which is what he is, if New England wants to trade for him and give him a big, the Bengals need like second-round picks, dude. They need those picks so very badly. Doesn't mean they're always going to hit. And you do have – it's less about him as a player and more about what these kind of situations represent in relation to the Bengals. They completely flubbed the Trey Hendrickson one. And every time you flub one of these situations, your PR, your reputation among agents, among players takes a hit. You don't want to be known as the cheapskate team who's going to drag their feet, not pay you, won't trade you, will just ignore you and like kind of lock you out. And then you've been a good team player. You've given it, Trey Hendrickson, he did his stuff. He did his thing. He was a great ambassador for the franchise, and the franchise dragged his feet. And then the last part of this, and it's not about the fans, but the fans need to get way less precious about these 2021 guys. They need to be looking to get back into the playoffs, not cobbling together a taped-together version of the 2021 Super Bowl team. You need to make serious moves, and you have to be willing to do it. And you can't just keep holding on to this memory of 5 years. That was 5 years ago they were in the Super Bowl, right? Like, what are we doing?
Nobody else gives a damn.
Nobody cares, dude. My team has sucked dude. I'm not sitting here I am still lamenting the Andrew Luck thing, but that's been so long ago. Like, you have to let that shit go. You have to look forward. And so many guys are so caught up in this. And I'm not saying anybody we know. I'm more talking to the people on Twitter. They see this all the time. It's just like, well, we have to get Trey Hendrickson. We have to get T. Higgins. We have to. It's like, no, you have to have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. If you don't have those two guys, you suck. I don't care who your coach is. Everybody else is interchangeable. It's like the NBA thing. Bill Simmons does this all the time. If you're not 1A, if you're not, even Luka Doncic wasn't untouchable. You have to start getting unprecious about these dudes, and you have to start looking at the money and looking at the talent allocation and the value of these contracts and get freaking real with yourself.
Yeah, it's a business, and that's why you see all these other successful franchises. They are constantly moving pieces around because they know when paydays are coming up. They know who's going to be agreeable to stuff or not. And you're right. You make a really good point about Trey Hendrickson being basically who you would want to be to represent your organization. And the Bengals, for the most part, treated him like shit for it. So what does that incentivize some other players to come into this franchise, especially all the stuff that you hear just around some of the league, or how about like 2 to 3 years ago, or I should say before the Super Bowl, when the Bengals organization was among the top 3 organizations getting constantly made fun of on ESPN, by Pat McAfee, by any of those guys. It's frustrating. I was going to say, my team went to the AFC Championship 6 years ago. Some people forget that. Our buddy, I brought it up the other day to one of our guys in the chat, and he's like, oh, yeah, the Titans did go to nobody gives a shit. Nobody gives a shit. And guess what? You're getting to the point where you're like, oh, we went to the Super Bowl 5 years ago. Your division rivals don't care. The Rams don't give a shit. Nobody gives. You lost. How many times you could be like, oh, if I think in the past 15 years, how many times have I seen San Francisco in the Super Bowl? I guarantee you get that number wrong unless you're a 49ers fan. Guess what? They lost every single one of them. The Bengals, and this is not just the Bengals. Other teams need to do this. I wish my Titans were more proactive than reactive. I think you could probably say the same thing about the Colts, is that you wish they would be more proactive. And the chance that they do, they make the trade for Sauce Gardner. Now, all of a sudden, you're not going to see your organization be proactive probably for the next 5 years, at least, because they got spooked because they make the argument they made the correct move. It's just a key player got hurt for it.
And one thing about the Bengals, and this is what I finished on, the reason I go so hard on this point, and the reason I always rant about it, is not I want the Bengals to be good. I hate hearing them get shit on. I'm not a Bengals fan, but I live near the stadium. I like when Cincinnati is way more fun when the Bengals are good. I used to not like them growing up because I didn't like those Palmer and Ocho Cinco teams. I didn't really care for those teams. I like Joe Burrow. I like Jamar Chase. I like these guys. Zach Taylor is milquetoast, and he's a below-average coach, but I don't even hate him. I want to see them do good, and it is very frustrating to foresee preventable mistakes, and they walk into the rake every single time. And sometimes you have to make tough choices as a fan, and as a team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my final piece on that. I think the Bengals really have their work cut out for them this offseason. I think they're probably going to hit on this draft pick. I'd really like to see them take the guy from Ohio State, the safety. They take Bain for Miami, which also would be a good move. That's a major move. I just think they have their work cut out for them.
I don't think those guys are going to be there, to be honest. We'll see. I hope there is somebody there, because I think the last thing the Bengals want to see is them trade back. But if you don't have a guy you don't like, don't force a pick. Trade back. Just let it happen. All right, we're going to speed run because we have spent a little bit too much unplanned time ranting about the Bengals. It was a good segment, but Browns, they made a trade with Houston, got tackle Titus Howard and gave up a 5th-round pick. They extended him 3 years, $63 million. Titus Howard is he's a good pass blocking offensive tackle. He's a terrible run blocking tackle according to PFF. But this is where it's going to lead into the Texans here. I'm going to combine the two because the Texans traded for, with Detroit, running back David Montgomery, which was needed. Who knows? With Joe Mixon, the more stuff that I've heard about him throughout the season, I don't know if we're going to see him on the field again. That's how bad his foot was and continues to be. But for that trade, they gave up another offensive lineman, Juice Scruggs, and a 6th and a 7th to get David Montgomery. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, the Texans, who have a notoriously bad offensive line, just got rid of 2 tackles. I take that back. Scruggs is a guard, but they got rid of 2 linemen. They did extend Trent Brown, 1 year, $7 million re-sign, who is, you can make the argument, probably one of the best run-blocking tackles in the league. That was very notable. They extended Dalton Schultz, their tight end, 1 year, $12.6 million, good payday for him. And then they gave an extension 1 year to their edge rusher, phenom, Danielle Hunter, 1 year, $40.1 million extension. So they had to pay some guys. So I understand why they were moving some guys. It makes me think, how heavy are the Texans? What are they going to do in the draft to shore up this offensive line? But Danielle Hunter is a monster. He deserves that money. Quite frankly, I know 40 is a lot for anybody, but when you're a top 5 defensive end in the league last year, part of that because of some other injuries happening just around the league, but Danielle Hunter's for real. Schultz, very solid tight end. Trent Brown, veteran, long time with New England, fantastic re-signs there. So they're re-signing their important guys, which is really good to see because you hate to see your team let these guys, big names, walk. So what's your reaction to our division rival, really, with the Texans? You can talk about the Browns, but let's be honest, we aren't too familiar with Titus Howard unless you're a Titus Howard stan.
The only thing I really have on the Browns is that their quarterback situation is terrible, and I can't really take seriously any moves that they make in terms of getting better if they don't have at least a competent replacement-level quarterback. But I do think the Browns are also kind of making decent moves. They have a pretty good defense. Getting this right tackle, Titus Howard, I think is a good move, but it's going to be moot unless they have a quarterback who's able to play up to par, and I don't think Shedeur Sanders is it. Moving on to Houston, who is a competent franchise for the most part. Danielle Hunter, great move. I think he's been one of the most underrated or under-talked about pass rushers in the league for a long time. He was really good in Minnesota, and he's getting his payday now. He earned it. I think Houston's defense is really scary, and the Colts, have to face him twice a year. And with D'Amico is such an underrated coach. I really, really, truly believe he's one of the best coaches in the league. I also really liked Houston's trade for David Montgomery. He runs a little similar to Joe Mixon. They're not exactly the same, but he can run in between the tackles well. He was getting forced out in Detroit mainly because if you're the Lions, you got to have Jahmyr Gibbs touching the ball more. He's so dynamic. He doesn't, at this point in time, he doesn't need to share carries with David Montgomery. He needs a player to take pressure off of him, another running back, but he needs to be getting the ball more. I think Houston is just continuing to bolster an already good team and bringing back legitimate guys like Danielle Hunter, who are key pieces on your team. Houston is probably right in line once more to make the playoffs. They're going to be competitive with Jacksonville, but I think Tennessee will improve a little bit, and I think we're going to be mediocre again. And Houston is on the track to probably be my favorite to win the division next year. And moves like what they've been doing kind of give me that rationale.
Our division's going to be fun. It's going to be competitive. Jacksonville's still going to be in the mix. This Texans team, I really do like David Montgomery. Not just the move itself, but I like him as a player all the way back in his Chicago days. Phenomenal guy. Just love watching him run the rock. I'm going to stay in the division here, and I'm going to link these two teams together, even though they're not in the same division. but because they made a trade with each other. So first off, the Colts have decided to give quarterback Daniel Jones the transition tag, which is basically they have the right to match any offer given to Daniel Jones. I have a feeling that Daniel Jones will stay with Indianapolis. At least that's what I've been reading and hearing so far. And the trade that they made was with the Packers. And I really want your take on this because he is a really good player. They decided to trade linebacker Zaire Franklin to get back defensive tackle Colby Wooden. And then the Packers also gave a 3-year, $44 million contract to offensive lineman Sean Ryan. And the Packers, if you haven't been maybe sticking your head down the cap situations with these teams and what they're looking at free agency, the Packers are at an interesting crossroads because they are going to have to let several key pieces walk, not just on their offensive line, but their defense. And there is particularly one really nice linebacker I want Tennessee to go after, but it seems like they're making this trade to compensate for losing one of their linebackers, and that's with Zaire Franklin, who was a All-Pro in 24, I believe, second team. And he's been a guy that's always been a standout for that Colts second line of defense.
I don't mind the trade for us, honestly. He was a big name, but he always put up a lot of big tackle numbers. He's a tackling maniac. However, sometimes that can be a little misleading. You know, guys getting into the second level on defense, and he's cleaning those up. He's missed quite a few tackles. Last year he had 21 missed tackles. I think you sell high on Zaire here. You can, one thing I'll say about the Colts is that in the Chris Ballard era, they've been able to find guys. Zaire Franklin was actually a good example of that. I believe he was out of Syracuse. They're able to find dudes like this. I'm not too worried about them replacing him. I think Green Bay gets a good tackling linebacker. They get a good leader in the locker room. Zaire is a really good leader in the Colts locker room. He's still going to be productive. He's kind of like a classic, middle linebacker type. He struggles in coverage a little bit. Maybe, I think Green Bay is going to be able to use him well, and I don't think we're going to miss him too much, but it is sad to see him go. Regarding Daniel Jones, I think Daniel Jones proved that he was worthy of re-signing even coming off the ACL injury. If you don't have a great plan at quarterback, I think running it back, if you're 8-2 with the coach and a decent team surrounding him, why not do that? What's so frustrating, I'm not going to go on a big Colts rant, but what I will say is what's so frustrating about the Chris Ballard era is that besides the Anthony Richardson pick, which set them back, and, they haven't always hit on some draft picks, I feel like they're generally making the right moves for the most part. I don't think they are always like messing up or doing anything like egregious, and they are, proactive. They've had some bad luck, but I think that's why Chris Ballard has continued to linger, is he's a decent talent evaluator. He's able to put together a good team, but they've never been able to eclipse 11 wins due to the quarterback situation or due to an injury or due to, coaching change. That's kind of the myth of the last 10 years. But I do think Daniel Jones earned himself another contract with us. I think Daniel is an input within a Shane Steichen system. He is a portion of the system. He is not the system. You don't play through him. He's kind of a conductor. Daniel Jones's best football is when he's highly efficient, making the plays that are given to him. He can freelance a little bit because he's a big guy, but he's not, don't throw the ball away. Just make, or not throw it away. Don't go crazy with it. You're not Lamar Jackson. Just make the plays that are designed for you. He did that. Unfortunately, got hurt. Now I think we're going to run it back. I don't know when he's going to come back. I do think Riley Leonard may have to start the season. But overall, I don't hate these moves for us.
No, I'm not going to add anything on the Colts there. I think you summarized it really, really well. They've always been a team in the mix, just nothing ever clicks all together at once. Moving on to our next team is the Chargers, who made some good extensions. Defensive tackle Tier Tart, 3-year extension, $37.5 million. Center Tyler Biadasz, 3-year, $30 million. So shoring up offensive line, key piece in the middle there. We'll have to see what they do. I feel like they'll be a team that we'll have to watch in the free agency market. But re-signing some key guys. I don't know if you have anything you want to add on to Taylor Tart or their center.
I can't believe you didn't want to. You just skipped over Jacksonville. I mean, they just re-signed DJ Dallas. That's a big move. That's
Listen,
huge.
man. There's some teams that have made some moves, and I was like, I'm not going to talk about DJ Dallas. Like, yeah, there's plenty of teams that have made some re-signs, but I'm like, they're not even giving me the number for it. They're probably getting a minimum, whatever. You know why I did.
You know what's crazy about, and this, honestly, I don't know how good of analysis this is going to be about LA, but I genuinely just do not care at all about the Chargers. I don't think about any of their moves. I obviously had my Justin Herbert screed, but to me they're just so like nothing to me. Like I don't even know how to describe it. They're not a bad team or anything. It's just like, when are you guys going to take the leap? When is something going to happen?
Yeah.
And
we've been waiting
like,
for that for a few years now.
Yeah, nothing ever happens. Not to be that meme, but like, here we are, and I don't know what to make of any of this, because I feel like at the end of the day, they're going to be 10-7, 11-6, and get bounced by, the wild card team, or like a wild card team. Good for them re-signing the center, bolstering the interior defensive line, but the Chargers still have a way to go. What they really need to do is sign a new medical staff, or just go get these like German scientists or somebody to give them like peptides or something. I don't even know. Start doing steroids, I guess, is what I would recommend for LA.
It's not a bad idea. It's not the worst idea. All right, I'm going to go rapid fire. I'm going to go to the NFC East because a lot of these were re-signs or tags. Cowboys, well-deserved. Javonte Williams, running back, re-signed 3-year, $24 million deal, $16 million guaranteed. Good, got that position locked up. Franchise tag George Pickens for $27.3 million. Well-deserved. Eagles have extended defensive tackle Jordan Davis. Georgia alum, 3-year, $78 million extension. The Commanders have extended 2 offensive linemen, Nick Algretti and Andrew Wiley. And the Giants have been relatively quiet because they're prepping for the draft in terms of re-signs, extensions. But I think we both agree that, hey, all of these guys on the list needed to be re-signed. Commanders needed the offensive line depth. Algretti was a solid piece for him last year. Jordan Davis is basically a monster, and you have to have him on that defensive front, just, And then Javonte Williams, good to see him fully recovered, get his burst back behind a pretty good offensive line with so many other offensive weapons allowing him to create some magic on the ground. And then George Pickens having his, I don't want to say career revival, but you're getting to see what the potential is, what his potential was coming out of the draft. And, they franchise tag him. We'll see what he does. I could see another good season. He gets truly extended again. But, what's your thoughts on the NFC East moves?
Not many thoughts. I think a lot of these teams are making the correct decisions this offseason. I'm interested to see what direction New York goes in under John Harbaugh, who they start to target, and what moves he makes, how that kind of impacts the way the direction of the team from what the Giants have been, which is a team that just kind of lacks identity, a team that gets hurt a lot, I think I'm curious to see what they do in the draft and this offseason. Also, really quick, I'm looking at I've been looking at overthecap.com, which is how I've been getting all of this information. How old do you think Russell Wilson is off the top of your head?
30. I'm going to say 35.
He's 38.
Damn.
I know. I was like, I was looking at this. I was like, Russell Wilson's 38? Anyway, I also continue to believe that Dallas is going to be better next year. They still have a lot of, their defense that remains to be seen. I don't know. I feel like the Cowboys are moving in the right direction. They still need some work. But the rest of this division, Philly kind of feels like a glue factory right now. And Washington, although they're kind of lurking, they're still very old. And they still have a long way to go to be consistently good every year. And for some reason, I don't know why Dallas is just sticking out to me. It's just kind of a gut feeling. We'll see what happens. But I really do like the Javonte re-signing and the George Pickens re-signing. Those are smart moves. So we'll see if Jerry's gonna upend what he's doing at some point. Maybe make a big move, big trade. We'll see.
I agree with the Cowboys. They're on the precipice of something, and I think we'll see in this draft that they go very heavy defense. If they get a couple guys that can contribute immediately and make that defense be a bottom 5 unit to a mid unit, let's just say 15, 20, even 15 to 25, I think you're going to see the Cowboys. I mean, the Eagles weren't exactly impressive last year. They have every chance to win that division because the Giants, they're going to be competitive, but they're not going to have the guns, the weapons to beat. And the Commanders are just this roster that has a couple young pieces of talent, and then everybody else is 1 foot into a retirement home. So I don't expect the Commanders to make big moves. It's going to be the Eagles and the Cowboys again, and we're going to see which team implodes first for that one. I agree. And then I will finish it out. I'll kind of combine these two. These are not division, but they're both NFC. Falcons, I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but they did put the franchise tag on Kyle Pitts. We'll be making a little over $15 million. And then the Rams, do the re-signs first. Tyler Higbee, solid tight end, 2-year, $8 million deal.
Go Tops.
They signed safety Cameron Curl, 3-year, $36 million deal. And this is one of the first trades that was made during this period, and it kind of got buried recently because of Max Crosby. But I do want to give a lot of props to the Rams at seizing an opportunity with Kansas City, who is trying to work their cap situation out. So they go get a very, very good corner with Trent McDuffie, and they give up a 26 first rounder, a 5th rounder, a 6th rounder, and a 27 third rounder. And that's a lot of picks for a corner. However, if you read more into it, only one of those picks was their own. Every other pick that they've used for this was capital from other teams that they gained from trades and whatnot. So basically, they got him for one draft pick, which is a phenomenal ad. If you would say if there's a weakness in part of the Rams unit, I would say it's their secondary overall. It's just nice padding. They're trying to continue to load up while they have Matthew Stafford and Puka Nacua and all these guys still under contract and not thinking about retirement with Stafford. So, hey, kudos to the Rams. I think that's one of those trades where Max Crosby will be more impactful for the Ravens, but Trent McDuffie will cover up some holes that their defense had a little bit more notably in key situations.
Les Snead is a great GM. I mean, genuinely, what's going on in LA down there? Every team besides the Lakers is just making really, really smart moves. If the Bengals need to take a page out of anyone's book, it needs to be the LA Rams, who seemingly continue to make savvy moves every offseason. I like the Trent McDuffie trade. I think it was incredibly proactive, and it does bolster their defensive backfield. You re-sign Cameron Curl, get some continuity back there. Getting Tyler Higbee back for cheap. He's not the best tight end there is. He's still a little bit of a receiving threat if he's able to be out there, but availability has been limited over the past few seasons. I mean, I think the Rams know that they have a certain window with Matthew Stafford and this current roster situation that they're making moves to at least be within the kind of top 5-6 teams year in and year out. I think that's kind of the range they are, because they know if with the quarterback and the coach, if they're going 12-5, even if they don't win the division, they're in the mix. They are a threat to win the Super Bowl, and however long you can extend that, I think is a win for LA. Oh, I did want to bring this up. I want to get your thoughts on this really quick. We're talking about the NFC West, not specifically divisions, but I want to pitch this at you. Kyler Murray, released by Arizona. He's going to be a free agent now. He was the Rookie of the Year in 2019. He came off a Heisman Trophy winning season at Oklahoma. 2 decent seasons. He's never really been a bad quarterback, but he's never really been a great quarterback either. I don't know what to think about Kyler Murray. He is polarizing. He's an enigma. On one hand, I think he's an incredibly talented quarterback. On the other hand, I don't think he's a very good quarterback. I don't think he's a winner. And that's not to say that he can't ever get there, but he's our age. He's like 28, 29, and he still seems incredibly immature in many ways, kind of like a teenager. What's your thoughts on Arizona moving off Kyler and just going full reset here?
I think it's good for both Kyler Murray and that franchise. The Cardinals are not in a situation to win right now, especially in that division. Jacoby Brissett, despite only having the one win, did play pretty damn well last season. They have some pieces on the offense. Their defense has a couple pieces, but it's just not enough to where you've seen Arizona was in a lot of games last year, but they never had the firepower to, let's say, get their offense back on the field, or they're down by too much. And then with Kyler Murray, who is, in my opinion, ever since he's had that ACL injury, hasn't looked quite the same. I think just because of the multiple coaching changes, offensive coordinator changes, it's definitely impacted some of his development. Where, I think I've said this multiple times on the pod, Kyler Murray and Caleb Williams remind me of so much of each other in terms of play style. And I think Caleb Williams has definitely, just within these past 2 years, has had more help with development than what Kyler Murray has had. Now, the real question is, where does Kyler Murray go? And for this one, I haven't looked at the cap for it. This is just me thinking okay, is he in that scenario where he could sign for a vet minimum kind of deal, like on a prove-it deal, because he's still getting a lot of this guaranteed money, so he could virtually go almost anywhere. And then a team like maybe the Vikings kind of pops in my head for that. Or, he's not done. Another team will give him a chance. Or maybe it's the Steelers if Aaron Rodgers doesn't make a decision. Or, there's so many other teams where maybe it's Vegas. Maybe they want to let Mendoza sit for a bit. I could see that. I could go down this entire list, but he's going to get another shot. I do see him kind of doing the vet minimum kind of deal, like the Russell Wilson situation with the Giants, or he's going to take a pretty low contract because he has all this money coming in. And for me, Minnesota makes the most sense because they are actively looking for this type of person to play their quarterback. They need somebody to light a fire under McCarthy. And I think when you're a team that has a similar setup to the Vikings, who has a roster that can win now, and the only thing holding you back is the quarterback. Well, guess what? That's the situation that the Jets felt like they were in about 4 or 5 years ago with Zach Wilson. And then that's when they made the move to get Aaron Rodgers. So I am not out on Kyler Murray. I still think with the right coach and the right system and a new environment that he can still be a productive quarterback. Do I think he's going to leap into another tier? Probably not, but he's too talented to just basically not have a job, not compete for a job.
I'm with you. I think Kyler Murray obviously will get another chance somewhere. Minnesota is the kind of prototypical situation you would expect him to move into, but there's, like you were saying, I could see Vegas maybe being in the mix. There is a place for him in the NFL. I was listening to Bomani Jones's podcast. It's not like he said this, and I agree. He's like, when did Kyler Murray just become terrible? You know what I mean? I feel like the discourse around him has become he's just bad now. And I don't think he's bad, and I don't think he ever was bad, but I do think he left a bad taste in people's mouths when he was signing this contract with the he had the Call of Duty clause or the video game clause in there. And I'm not one to police people's behavior, when they're doing, work stuff. I get it. To Kyler Murray, this is a job, and you don't always want to be locked in. But, man, dude, if somebody's paying you that much money, maybe lay off some of the COD or whatever you're playing in the season, especially at the quarterback position, if that's going to impact your study time, impact how you're going to be able to, run your team, essentially. And he was getting by on seemingly, he was getting by on talent, and it worked a little bit, but after he got hurt, a little dinged up, Arizona was never really that great. I'm curious to see if he can become another reclamation project like Baker Mayfield or Daniel Jones before both those guys got banged up. Other examples, Sam Darnold now being the quintessential example of that. I think that could be in store for Kyler Murray because, again, the talent is there, but I think he needs to take himself a little more seriously instead of – I think now that maybe he's not the franchise quarterback anymore for Arizona, he can – a little bit of pressure's been let off, with this and how he sees himself and the discourse around him, because I think the past 2 years he was kind of lingering in that talk because of the contract he had, and I don't think anybody viewed him that way. But if you're him internally, that's kind of what you view yourself as. You're making this amount of money. This is your team. Arizona made a big move to go get you in the 2019 draft. I was there. I watched Kyler Murray get drafted. So I'd like to see him get a fresh start somewhere else. Maybe if it works in Minnesota, Kevin O'Connell's a good coach. That'll be an interesting situation. But that's kind of my 2 cents on him.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought process. We might get an answer in the next week. We'll see. In terms of the free agency news, that's all we have for right now. Now, I guarantee you we'll have a part 2 of this segment coming on next week, because then we'll get to see a lot more moves happen, quite a bit more reactions, hopefully exciting ones for us. We'll see. We're going to move on to our next section, which is kind of like the debate game that we played last week. Now, I want to give you, so I have some left over that I made from the previous week, and I've actually added another tier, so I'll give you the option between the two. Do you want to do current or mid to late 2000s to the teens era?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's do the throwback.
Okay.
Let's do the throwback.
So I have, once again, I'm going to start off with the keep 2, cut 2. Okay?
All right.
I'll be honest with you, I did not look at career stats for these guys, so I'm going to be in the dark just as much as you are on this. So this is probably nostalgia at this point. So at quarterbacks, my list is, and I'm trying not to pick super obvious ones either, like, oh, it's Peyton Manning versus, pick your Joe Schmo. But anyway, quarterbacks, Alex Smith, Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan. Who do you keep? Who do you cut?
Right off the rip, I think gut tells me Matt Ryan I'm keeping, and I'm also keeping Alex Smith.
Okay.
I'm keeping Alex Smith.
I'm going to also keep Matt Ryan, and I'm going to keep Kirk Cousins. Not because I have any particular disdain for Alex Smith, but just because I feel like those two players are so similar. But I feel like Kirk Cousins has the higher ability to make something happen. You can make the argument, oh, it's Thursday night Kirk, whatever it is. But like, how many times has Alex Smith been chased out of an organization because he just couldn't get the job done? And you could probably make that mention about Kirk Cousins as well. But at least Kirk, you had the moments where you would you would see him kind of just go off, onto the field multiple weeks at a time. And you're like, man, is Kirk in the MVP conversation? I don't feel like you ever got that from Alex Smith, where Alex Smith was a true, you kind of mentioned the name of a conductor like Daniel Jones. I always felt that was with Alex Smith. Kirk, even though more times than not it did not work, you felt like, okay, there's always a chance with him. With Alex, it was like, okay, he's got to make the right moves. He's got to, get it to Jamal Charles. He's got to get, pick your player on. It just never felt like Alex was the guy anywhere that he went. Whereas Kirk Cousins, you had your moments where, it's Kirk O'Ban's, like he's coming out. I don't know. That's just more of a gut feeling for me. I don't have any argument with the Alex Smith one. I think we both have Derek Carr's 4th spot overall. And I think we both have Matt Ryan as number 1 in this scenario, because what Matt Ryan did in his prime was head and shoulders above Kirk Cousins, Alex Smith, Derek Carr in his prime.
I think, I don't disagree with anything you're saying about Kirk Cousins. I think this conversation more comes down to beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I don't think there's any disagreement, me and you here on Matt Ryan. He was an MVP level player, and although he came up short in the Super Bowl, I think we all recognize how consistent Matt Ryan was throughout his career, and he's just a really good quarterback. I think he's just a slight tier above in terms of production regarding these other guys. Why I defaulted to Alex Smith was simply, I feel like Alex Smith as a game manager, because I totally understand your rationale on, like, Kirk Cousins has the higher ceiling play to play on arm talent and things he's able to do. I would submit that Alex Smith, in the role he was asked to do, did it exceptionally well, and maybe he could do more if he was asked to do that, but the teams he typically quarterbacked, especially at the midpoint of his career, not as much early in his career when it was literally all on him, and I think he was kind of feeling out the ropes. I think at that point in time, it was run heavy, it was defense, it was do what the quarterback or the play caller says. Here's why I like Alex Smith. I'm going to read the team records from teams he coached or quarterback from 2011 to 2017. So this is San Francisco to Kansas City. This is right before Washington. 13-3, 6-2-1, 11-4, 8-7, 11-5, 11-4, 9-6. Kirk Cousins, I believe, in similar stretches of his career, he's had 2 seasons where he's won 10-plus games, a couple 9 wins in there. The reason and that doesn't mean everything when you're taking quarterback play into account, but I guess to me, Alex Smith he's less likely to turn the ball over. I think he's more likely to default to making the correct play. And if my team is set up in a way that I don't think Alex Smith is going to go lose you the game necessarily, where Kirk Cousins absolutely could in some situations. That's probably why I default to Alex Smith. The floor is there. I like Alex Smith, and his 2017 season showed that if he is able to, especially later in his career, 4,000 yards, 26 passing touchdowns, only 5 picks. He always kept his interception numbers low since his kind of poor start to his career. Now, that doesn't tell you everything, because that typically means you're not taking as many chances. But I would just argue that he's very efficient. Now, he did get to play for Jim Harbaugh, Andy Reid, two hyper-efficient play callers who are really good offensive minds. But I think that speaks to Alex Smith and his capability in that he was able to succeed in those systems, and the coaching staff as well as Alex were mutually able to benefit off each other.
That's fair. I think I could also make the argument that Alex Smith has, for the most part of his career, had a much better supporting cast as well, which it's a positive for your point. It's a negative for my point. And I understand where you're coming from, where Alex Smith was able to work with some very intensive, depth-wise offensive minds and get their system to work. So, yeah, don't hate on the Alex Smith take there. Let's jump over to running backs. And we have seen a lot of these guys play, because 3 of them came from our division in our younger days, and that is running backs: Arian Foster, DeMarco Murray, Maurice Jones-Drew, and in the other conference, Matt Forte.
Wow. This one's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, genuinely, this one is tough. I like all 4 of these guys, really. All right, I'm going to preface this, and I felt the same way about the quarterbacks too, but even more so now. All 4 of these guys are incredibly good. I mean, you're really splitting hairs at this point in time. I mean, I'm going to probably just default to my favorite guys. I like MJD. I'm going to take him. I really like MJD. I think he's one of the most, probably, gosh, you think about his career now in the context of where we're at now. I feel like people don't talk about him anymore. He was such a good player, and he was so unique in that he was short but stocky. He had a low center of gravity. He ran hard. He could run through people. And then, I am going to, oh man, this is tough. Genuinely. I want to take, I think I'm going to take Arian Foster. And
Okay.
I understand. God, I'm telling you, it was razor's edge between him and Forte. I like DeMarco Murray, but I genuinely believe that all 3 of those guys are better than DeMarco Murray. Maybe not by a lot, but I do really like the ceiling of Arian Foster. What do you think on your picks?
Well, I'm taking Matt Forte just because of he was kind of that era's basically Christian McCaffrey. He was just one of the premier pass catchers out of the backfield. And for the longest time, you could universally, in a time of turbulence with Chicago, which has been for most of their franchise history, but he was the guy that was the most consistent, most solid, had a very long career. Reminds me a lot of like guys like Corey Dillon, that in that kind of era. So I'm picking Matt Forte. And then I'm going to eliminate MJD just because of longevity, not because of skill or talent or anything like that. Oh, this is tough. But I think I'm going to have to go DeMarco Murray, my boy, on this one just because what he did, even though he was behind a phenomenal Dallas front, he made the most of it. I could make the argument that even though if you would compare his career to Zeke's, Murray's explosiveness with when his coming out party with Dallas was just taking the NFL world by storm. I remember the one game he ran for like 255 yards, something like that. He did okay with Philadelphia, and they shipped him out to Tennessee, where he was kind of our back. He was basically the link between, CJ2K, himself, and then Derrick Henry. And loved DeMarco Murray, explosive runner, just like MJD, can lower his head down, not as much of a power back, but he's definitely a one-cut monster. And that would say the same as Arian Foster. I think Arian Foster and Marco Murray are similar players, but I think Arian Foster had a little bit more speed, quickness to him, better zone cut guy, whereas DeMarco Murray could do that, but I felt like he had a little bit more power behind him. And like I said, I don't have any stats pulled up. I don't pull any, so I can't sit here and deflect off the stats. This is just, hey, personal opinion. And this is probably the toughest category that I've made. When I sat down and made this, I'm like, man, I kind of cooked with this one. I think anybody you could pick any one of these guys. There is not one that stands out because they are all great running backs for their time. And you can make the argument that if Arian Foster would have played longer, that he could be number one on this list. But he also had a relatively shorter career compared to, let's say, Matt Forte or even DeMarco Murray at that point.
I want to take it to MJD really quickly because I think this is interesting. I think a lot of people forget that Maurice Jones-Drew shared the backfield with Fred Taylor his first 3 years in the league, which, by the way, in hindsight, holy cow, Fred Taylor and MJD in the backfield together. I mean, 2008, even with sharing carries, 824 yards, 12 TDs. Rookie year, 06. I remember when he burst onto the scene. 941 yards, 13 touchdowns. His best year, yardage-wise, 2011, 1,600 yards and 8 touchdowns. Then, the injuries bug started to pile up. He got less efficient as his career went on, especially in the later years. But he was seeing so many carries. I mean, the 2011 season alone, man, he had 343 rushing attempts. That's just so nuts. And, I feel like as far as DeMarco Murray and Arian Foster go, if you look at their careers on Pro Football Reference, I think on first glance it would lead you to say DeMarco Murray, but I think it really comes down to a preference thing. I just felt like Foster had a higher ceiling, but Murray was more available than Arian Foster. Arian Foster really had 3-4 good seasons. He had one really good season. However, DeMarco Murray also had one really, really good season and then a few pretty good seasons. I think, to me, when I compare their statistical finishes at the end of the year, it seems to me like even in shortened seasons where he only played 13 games, Foster had just a slightly better career. He had one more good season as opposed to Murray. I always felt like he was a little more explosive. But again, you're splitting hairs. They're both really good. I think it's funny because I didn't pick Matt Forte, and I think it's very easy to say that we haven't really discussed him that much. You mentioned he was similar to CMC in eras prior. I just wanted to go highlight Foster and MJD. However, Matt Forte is probably the best running back on this list, really.
I think part of it, too, is that MJD, Arian Foster, DeMarco Murray probably had about 7-8 years in the NFL, and Matt Forte had 10. So his stats are going to look better. Availability is the key word if you want to look at those four guys, who's more available, it's definitely Matt Forte. whereas Foster's had some pretty big injuries. Murray's been in and out. MJD, like you said, they drove him into the ground because this was the era in Jacksonville where it was pound the rock, and if that doesn't work, keep running it. It'll crack open eventually. These are all guys that we grew up with, basically, high school watching Run the Rock, or, a little bit into middle school there. And our division overall, even though I didn't include a Colts running back here, for the most part, we've been blessed with some very good running backs to watch throughout most of our lifetimes.
I'm proud to say that I've seen both DeMarco Murray and Maurice Jones-Drew play live, and I believe, let me look up MJD here. So I saw him, let me see, 2012 Indianapolis. Yeah. Okay. This is the game. Andrew Luck's home debut. 28 rushing attempts, 177 yards, and 1 touchdown. So I got to watch one of the great games he had during the 2012 season, which was pretty much cut short due to injury. 2013, glue factory. I mean, he had 800 yards, 5 touchdowns. DeMarco Murray, at the point I saw him, was in 2017. I believe he was splitting carries with Derrick Henry at that point, kind of passing the torch. But I will say this about Matt Forte, and this kind of thought comes into my mind as I look at the stat breakdowns, is that, yes, he did get he was more of a receiving threat, which is why he was so valuable. His best, he had in 2014, where he didn't even make the Pro Bowl, he had 800 receiving yards and 1,000 passing yards. So he was very close to getting in a 1,000, which Christian McCaffrey has since gotten. He also played for the Chicago Bears, who did have some offensive weapons at that point in time, don't get me wrong, but I don't feel like their quarterback situation, even with Jay Cutler, was ever the best. And I'm sure if he played Matt Forte with somebody like Drew Brees, God knows how much yardage he could have put up. I mean, I genuinely. But I don't feel like he was ever the most dynamic rusher specifically. Not saying he wasn't dynamic, but I think his Swiss Army knife capabilities made him a valuable player, and he's kind of a prototype to what we're seeing now in be a more valuable asset to running backs. And it just goes to show you how many, some of these guys or some of these teams do committees because some dudes just aren't very good at running. Some dudes just catch, and they're like little mini wide receivers. And Matt Forte had both of them. It's just also Christian McCaffrey is one of the reasons he's so good. He's got both those skills, and they're able to touch the ball a lot and be dynamic, which is really important. But I'm comfortable with my picks. But all 4 of those guys deserve their flowers. Really great players.
I think my running back one was the best one I made up here, but I think this wide receiver one's pretty solid too. So our 4 options at wide receiver are A.J. Green, Demaryius Thomas, Deshaun Jackson, Dez Bryant.
All right. Wow. I mean, honestly, I'm going A.J. Green and Dez Bryant. I think A.J. Green is the best player on this list. And you know what? I've never been a big Deshaun Jackson guy, really. I think I've always felt like he was a little overrated, although he did have really good speed. I was never the biggest believer in him specifically. Had a long career, pretty dynamic player, a little unreliable. Dez Bryant, I always felt like was super talented, and he was just not able to, overcome being on the Cowboys, essentially. And I also think he got banged up toward the latter part of his career. Looking at these stats now, I mean, he had 3 really, really good seasons. I don't know. I do feel like genuinely that AJ Green is the best player on this list, though. And I think looking up these stats, 1 second, AJ Green, he kind of he kind of did the Mike Evans before Mike Evans. Now, Mike Evans did it longer, but 5 straight seasons starting off his career, and this is with Andy Dalton at quarterback, 1,000 plus yards. 3 of those 5 seasons, he had 10, 11 touchdowns. He had one more 1,000-yard season in 2017. He was 29 years old, had 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. Then he kind of fell off a little bit. He got hurt. He did play for the Cardinals the last 2 years of his career. The Bengals were looking to move on. It was a different era. But A.J. Green was always so consistent, and he was a great athlete, high jumping ability. Bengals Ring of Honor guy for sure. He the selection of A.J. Green, I feel like re-energized the Bengals franchise at that point in time. Not as much as like the Jamar Chase draft did, more recently, but I want to give A.J. Green his props. And then Demaryius Thomas, I feel like he was he was a great player, but I feel like he benefited a lot from his quarterback situation. But, that's I can't blame Demaryius Thomas for that. He was a really good player too, all things considered. What's your thoughts?
I'm in agreement that I think A.J. Green is the best player on this list. I think talent-wise, you could potentially put Dez at second, but the longevity is the issue. I feel like this is now... So I'm going to eliminate Dez from it, but I think he is uber talented. I just think his career was shortened. So then you're looking at Demaryius Thomas and Deshaun Jackson. It's like, well, you make a good point. Demaryius Thomas has definitely been a benefit of Peyton Manning. And, when he was on those teams, he definitely was not the only receiving threat out there. I believe it was Emmanuel Sanders and Julius Thomas. Then you had Deshaun Jackson, who is the speed demon. He's had the longest career out of all of these players. So even though maybe his stats aren't as high, he definitely, which is surprising that he has definitely had more longevity, and he's definitely been a little bit more versatile in terms of like, hey, how many times have we seen Deshaun Jackson on, punt return, turn something that shouldn't have happened into something? Oh, man, it's tough. I think as a pure wide receiver point, I'm going to go Demaryius Thomas. I think Deshaun Jackson's probably a better athlete. He's probably maybe the best athlete on this list, potentially. But I am going to pick A.J. Green, Demaryius Thomas. I'm going to cut the other two. Demaryius Thomas was one of those guys, in the A.J. Green area, before DeAndre Hopkins, before Antonio Brown, those guys. He was one of the high-key guys that was there. And Deshaun Jackson was just the speed demon where if you saw, take your quarterback. If you saw Michael Vick dropping back and he throws the ball 60 yards down the field, it's only one person that he's throwing it down there to, and it's Deshaun. This is a tougher one than I thought when I actually sat down and looked at it. But I'm going to go A.J. Green, Demaryius Thomas. Demaryius Thomas is a very solid wide receiver, big frame guy, kind of like A.J. Green. I think A.J. Green has better athletic acumen than Demaryius does. But, man, I'm going to pick those two. But Deshaun Jackson, I think, is a guy that we'll probably talk about in a few years from now and be like, damn, he really did have a really, really good career overall. He may have not had the highlight seasons compared to some of those other guys. A.J. Green, like you said, the consistency with the multiple 1,000-yard seasons, double-digit touchdowns. Deshaun Jackson has never had a double-digit touchdown season, but he's definitely had, multiple 1,000-yard seasons. He's gotten a couple 9-touchdown seasons. Demaryius Thomas, he's had five 1,000-yard seasons. multiple double-digit touchdowns. I'm going to stick with my 2 picks, but Deshaun Jackson is a guy I think that we think more of as a gadget kind of guy, but I think we forget how impactful he was in that era.
If I had to switch, I would probably take Demaryius Thomas over Dez, but I think the talent with Dez was higher. But again, talent versus production, what's more valuable? I would always probably opt toward production in the end of it. I mean, Demaryius Thomas, he never really stood out to me as one of the best wide receivers in the league, but his numbers would always be around there. And just because a player isn't flashy doesn't mean he's not damn good and making great plays. I mean, you could argue that Demaryius Thomas has the most famous play. Well, Deshaun Jackson with his punt return, miracle in the Meadowlands too. But I was thinking that Tim Tebow against the Steelers, Demaryius Thomas, catching the ball, winning Tim Tebow the playoff game, winning Denver the playoff game. It's kind of buried now with Josh McDaniels being the coach of that team and everything. And also, I just want to say rest in peace, Demaryius Thomas. He's sadly not with us any longer. But he was a really, really good player, and I always enjoyed watching him. And if you had him in fantasy, he was kind of a pencil him in kind of guy.
Yeah, you just set it and forget it. You never had to question to take him out. Okay. Fun little, game right there. I think it was less argumentative, but that's because when you're doing an era, you're talking about all these players who are extremely good, well respected during that time frame. Now we get to tackle the interesting topic, and that is Iran and the conflict in Iran that has started back on February 28th. I don't know if the right way to approach this is chronologically, or if there's any main events you want to hit. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna start off kind of with a little intro into it, and then if you want to jump in and take off, by all means. So 28th was when United States and Israel launched what was basically codenamed Epic Fury, which was basically sending multiple missile strikes across the country of Iran, and one of those strikes killing their supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, who's led the country since 1989. That being said, there's been obviously quite a few casualties involved, and the numbers are still coming in to this moment with different organizations are telling different things, but it's in the thousands at this point. And of course, Iran retaliated in striking Israel and other U.S. allies in the region, including Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE. And between the loss of life and the strike of different U.S. bases in these countries and civilian targets getting hit, there's also a lot of concern about not just the lives lost and what's going on in the chaos, but also the economic effects this could have, especially with oil delivery, with this being a region that is, I want to say it's at least 20% of the world's oil kind of comes through this region, if not more. I want to say up to 80% of tankers travel through this region, so they're having to be rerouted. And we're definitely seeing that a little bit now in terms of how that's affecting the gas prices at home, and I don't expect that to change. I don't know if you want to hop in now, or do you want me to continue to talk about specific key points in terms of where some strikes have been, or...
I want to preface this by saying that I am no military strategist. I don't know plans on the battlefield. I don't know how these orders come down from the executive to the military to commanding officers to actual effectiveness in the air, on the ground, or on the sea. I just know that here's what I see around me currently. gas prices went from, I think, around like 260, 270 to now they're hovering in the like 314 to sometimes even as high as like 330 range, maybe 340 even, depending on the Valero station near where I live has been the cheapest one, but that gas typically burns the fastest. I don't know where they source all of these from. I just know that the price of an oil barrel has skyrocketed in the past, it's been a week, so maybe a little longer. That's gonna be a challenge, folks. If for everybody out there getting to work and everybody out there trying to save some money, maybe budget in some other ways. It's definitely, if you live in the United States and you have to drive everywhere, that's one of the first things you notice when these type of events take place is just the immediate impact on the oil market and gasoline prices specifically. You have to drive everywhere in the United States, essentially. I'm lucky to live in a community where I can walk a little bit, but if you want to get to work, you're gonna have to have a car. In terms of Iran as a geopolitical agitator to the United States and Israel writ large, I think the timing tracks with what everything the Trump administration had been saying for a long time. I was never under any illusion that the United States was not going to get into one of these wars. I did not believe that with the... I felt like when Trump was running for president the second time, that was almost baked into the cake. I never considered him anti-war or anti-willing to use the military. I thought that was more of a campaign talking point, so I took it as a grain of salt. Now, you can argue that the severity of how that ended and whether a certain amount of people believe that or not to be true, I mean, it's hard to say. I'm not in their heads. But I never believed that we were going to be dovish in regards to Iran or the Middle East, especially after October 7th when Israel was attacked by Hamas, and that became a big focus of their country. They launched a war on Gaza and I believe to their northern border in Lebanon. And from Israel's perspective, from what I read, is that they believe they are in a crisis, like a war, and that's why they've been so aggressive on military strikes, specifically in Gaza and other areas in the Middle East. Now, I'm not going to... That's a whole other can of worms. I will just say that I am pained to see the loss of human life in Gaza, and I think some of what's gone on there is horrifying and bad, and it just shouldn't happen. But regardless, I think that when it comes to Iran specifically, it seemed like their country had been weakened to the point where Trump had an opportunity, and more specifically Marco Rubio. Trump gives the final warning, but I think Rubio has really elevated himself behind the scenes. He's been a neoconservative, I guess, war hawk is the best way to describe him for a long time. He's been very involved in Latin America specifically because of his heritage. He's of Cuban heritage. And he's very hawkish on utilizing the military to, help America's quote-unquote position in certain regions around the world. So with Rubio being the selection for Secretary of State, and with Trump in the White House seemingly kind of transactional and He's an opportunist. I think he's really focused on his legacy. With the situation in Iran right now, with the economic sanctions and everything that's gone on, with how they retaliated during the first 2025 strikes, I believe the United States did it. I don't remember if Israel was involved or not, but they bombed the Iran nuclear facility. They did not clear the whole thing out. At the time it was reported they did. They didn't. They had to go back in this time. And I think at this junction, they believed that the Ayatollah and the IRGC, which is, I believe, the Islamic Republic, it's like their paramilitary arm or their military in Iran, they decided now was the time, and it's lingered on for a week. I could see this lingering on for weeks and weeks, months even. I don't think this is going to be an easy situation to resolve. Iran's about to elect or choose a new leader after Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the airstrikes through, I believe, I don't know the Israeli Air Force's exact title, but the Israeli Air Force bombed the facility that he was at. He was 86 years old. He had led the country for a long time. Now there's who's going to lead Iran. That question's up in the air. I know this is something that many people, especially older than us, I would say probably people left over from the Bush administration or maybe even the Obama administration, and certainly people within Trump's orbit, this is something they've wanted, and Trump gave this to them, and we're going to have to see this through. This is our war coupled with Israel. I mean, this is a war of choice, and we're going to have to live with the consequences regardless. Now, I will say I don't think this is the same situation as Iraq, where it doesn't feel that way. I was alive then. I was a very little kid. I don't want to say anything that sounds ignorant or out of step. Or not out of step, but like I'm definitely not, a geopolitical strategist or a military strategist. But it doesn't feel the same at that point in time. But again, it remains to be seen. What's your kind of thoughts on all of this?
I do agree. It does not feel the same. And of course, this is me also kind of speaking out of turn because Desert Storm was before I was alive. Now, it's been something that I've had my interest in. With Desert Storm in Iraq, it was definitely felt more like a global effort versus it was, right now it feels like it's the United States and Israel. However, this kind of goes to my next point is, with some of these strikes that have been countered, or I should say that Iran has struck back on, and I've mentioned just a few countries in the region, but there's also others like Cyprus, there's Azerbaijan, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan. There's a lot of countries that have been involved with this, and most of these strikes have been U.S. military based. They're not intentionally trying to strike civilian areas. However, I'm sure you're aware of this, is that in Dubai, a civilian kind of hotel was hit, and then what I thought was, I don't want to use the word interesting, but in Cyprus, a RAF base was hit. So even though this is a United States-Israel conflict, depending on Iran's targeting and who they hit, could they potentially drag in some other countries against them? Because Iran has already basically apologized to Oman for a strike that was not supposed to happen or hit a different target than it intended to. I'm sure RAF and the United Kingdom is not happy about this as well. And then, just keep talking about Iran and who they're making mad, but, Hezbollah and Lebanon has been striking Israel as well, and Israel counterstriked, and there's been at least 200 casualties involved with this. So what is the most difficult thing about this conflict is correctly getting information about what's going on in the region. Not necessarily what we're doing, not necessarily. It's because especially, I'm sure you've seen this, and we've probably all have seen this to a degree on social media, is that there's so much information on it, and I can. There's this sense of there is at least maybe the term propaganda is not correct, but on both sides, where it's really difficult to tell what is happening, what is not. Um, we're sending the George H.W. Bush carrier fleet out there as well. So it's like, okay, are we throwing more at it? Has one carrier fleet maybe taken some hits and it's not getting reported as much? There have already been confirmations that some U.S. fighter planes have been basically shot down. However, the U.S. says it's due to friendly fire, and of course, Iran says it's otherwise. The probably the most all death in warfare is terrible, but I think the one that comes out the most is that there was in Iran there was at least 165 people that were killed at a girls' elementary school in Manab, and this is from reports of the United Nations. This is not coming from Iran. This is coming from the UN, and of course, Israel or the U.S. Neither one of them have taken responsibility for this attack. So it's the loss of life is absolutely tragic. It's one of those where, in terms of personal opinion, and along with, I believe, 80% of other Americans, I would prefer if we were not involved whatsoever. And there were signs leading up to this, like you had mentioned. Like one I remember in particular is basically President Trump coming after military manufacturers like Lockheed Martin and whatnot to basically step up productivity, and it makes sense with current events, is why he had this declaration in early to mid-February, is that obviously this has been on the table for a while now. And it's, between all this misinformation that's going around, it's very difficult for us to tell what is real and what is not. In terms of recent events the past couple of days, apparently Russia has been feeding Iran, and China as well has been feeding information on U.S. targets to hit. And I've heard some information that some of the interceptors that we're using for these drone strikes that Iran's trying to use is considerably more pricey than what Iran is using, which like I said, I don't know numbers. I'm not, once again, not a military genius, nothing like that. But it makes me wonder, what's the stockpile look like in terms of weaponry? How much money is the U.S. military and our government expending on this conflict? We eliminated Supreme Leader, and they're going to elect a new one. Well, as of right now, we don't necessarily know who that's going to be. We most likely have guesses, or we have, we might think who it is, but we don't necessarily know their politics behind it. Do they want to bend the knee, or are they going to step up? Are they going to be more resilient? We're not sure. We will still wait for news to come on out. Like you said, this has only been going on for a week, 8 days, and it's still difficult to get information. I feel like even out of the major news outlets, AP News, take your pick on your news outlet, there's not a whole lot of information being provided. It's like it's more quotes from what leaders, specifically Trump and his administration, are saying. And I'm not saying that's not as valuable. I feel like we're not getting the information about what is actually going on over there. And that's where I have concerns about what the actual conditions are for both sides in this conflict.
One of the images of what sticks out from this war so far today at least, are the strikes against Iranian oil infrastructure and energy infrastructure. I'm on the front page of the New York Times website, and it looks just like black clouds above Tehran, just flames and black clouds, and the United States as well as Israel is targeting critical infrastructure there. It's going to take a few weeks to really see how this shakes out and how the Iranian government reacts to this type of situation. I know they've been sending missiles off at the Gulf states. One hit Cyprus, which is a British military base, hit there. They also sent one off at Turkey, who shot down one of the missiles. That could trigger Article 5. I would be very wary of, if I was Iran, of getting Europe or specifically Turkey involved in this, who is one of the largest militaries in the NATO alliance. So, again, I just kind of want to emphasize, from my perspective, this is the president and his administration's war of choice. I think at this moment in time, they felt like they had an advantageous opportunity to push the Iranian citizenry and or government into a position to change leadership to make it more beneficial to, Israel or the United States, or more broadly the European Union and other allies of those countries. They needed a catalyst. They had been talking about this for a while, and they took the opportunity. But for whatever happens, this is now the legacy of the Trump presidency. More than the big, beautiful bill, arguably more than ICE. And these are consequential. That's consequential legislation. That is consequential domestic policy. However, when you participate in a war of choice against Iran, who's been an American adversary for a long time, that's something you got to own. And win or lose, or whatever happens, it's just that the outcome of that is on you. And from my perspective, I think I would have preferred, I know I would have preferred that we not take this opportunity, even though the government may feel otherwise. I feel like it was it feels like a reckless escalation. And I also feel like the people who, no matter how you feel about the Iranian government, of which I do not support and I do not back because they've killed protesters, slaughtered protesters earlier in the year. We talked about this. And I'm not in that country, so I don't know the dynamics of it. But you don't want your government, the United States government, Iran's government, killing its citizens in any context. I think I'm 28 years old. You're 29 years old. I'm about to turn 29. We have everybody we know is in the age of probably 18 to 33, in that age range. I got to be honest, and maybe it's just I don't want to speak for everybody in our generation, but I don't know a lot of people around us who are clamoring for this to happen. I don't know them. I've yet to meet. I'm sure they're out there. I don't know a lot of them, and I feel like this war is something for the older generation to rally behind. I don't think opinion polls would show people in our age cohort backing what's happening, and I think anecdotally, if you talk to many people our age or younger, they're probably going to back that up, because people our age and in Iran too are going to be on the receiving end of the majority of these strikes, casualty of war. And when it comes down to a war of choice, like a chessboard type move, I think people have a real problem with that. And that it feels like a needless escalation in the chessboard move of the Middle East, and it feels like it didn't need to happen. And that's kind of where I land on this.
Yeah, it's tragic regardless. I agree. I would say for most people, regardless of the age group, I think the majority of people in the U.S. does not agree with this action. Now, my thought, and you make a really good point about Article 5 here, is that once it's on, once that switch is flipped, and those of you who don't, I'm sure most of our viewers do know what Article 5 is in NATO, but if you're not aware of Article 5, they're basically saying if a member of NATO is attacked by a non-NATO member, that it will basically launch all of NATO in response and retaliation, not just one country. It does not necessarily mean that it'll be boots on the ground from every single country, but definitely supplies. Definitely, it's basically, okay, you have just turned an entire continent into war escalation, which is the last thing that Iran wants. Because, quite frankly, if Iran was to do this, I would think the only reason that they would try to do this is that they are hoping from assistance with either Russia or China, or, and to be quite frank, maybe Russia would join in if they weren't struggling in Ukraine like they have for the past, 5 years now, if not longer. And I don't think China would be willing to jump into this. But in terms of, and this is me, no information, I'm just thinking out loud here, is that if the U.S. public did not want this, if we are seen potentially as the aggressor, and I would say that we are the aggressor in this, it's basically a preemptive strike, is that what are the conditions that made our government think that this is the appropriate action? So I think back to our podcast a month ago when we were talking about the protests that were going on, and President Trump basically, not in quote, but saying, hey, take control of your country. The U.S. stands behind you. And I think probably our government senses the highest amount of instability in Iran, probably since the revolution. And it sees that, okay, if we are able to remove the figurehead of the new government, and the new figurehead hopefully bends the knee here by us doing continuous infrastructure damage to the country, that we could potentially see a positive change. It would be less potential deaths overall for a regime change, a ideological change perhaps. What the Trump administration and all of us do not want is a long drawn out conflict where potentially we would have U.S. personnel en masse in Iran. Do not want to see that. That tells me that the initial decision makings of the executive branch and ever those involved with military planning circles is that they have most likely failed their initial objectives. They do not want another Afghanistan. They do not want a drawn-out war, because the longer this goes on, the worse it is for Trump and therefore the Republican Party as a whole. So my bet is that they are trying to cripple the functional capacity of Iran as much as they can, and basically with a new leader coming out to say, we will stop, we will have regime change, we will have this, we'll negotiate. But I feel like that is That's a risk. I feel like that is a. I don't even want to say the word calculated risk. I just feel like that's rolling the dice right there, because I don't see, like, you're either hoping for an internal change from external pressure right now, or you are, the only other way that it's going to change is if you force the change. Not like this, but actually trying to control a country. Because what happened, I would say, in Iraq and Afghanistan is that we went in, we destroyed basically what stability that they had in the government, left a power vacuum, and then we said good luck for the most part. And there's been so many people, ex-military, that I've seen interviews with, and they have questioned the decision-making process made in Iraq, made in Afghanistan. And I would really, really hope to say, I'm like, hey, our country has already basically took a 1 foot in the hole kind of deal. I'm like, don't make the same mistakes. You've already got yourself in. You got to find a way to finish this as quickly as possible with as minimal loss as possible. And it's a lot of guesswork from our side at this point, because if I'm getting any type of personnel, it's the meme where the FBI agents are going to bust through this back window here and drag me out. So it's just us talking and guessing and thinking, but you're right. The last thing that we, anybody wants on the United States side is a prolonged conflict. I don't know what Israel's intentions are, if they exactly align with the United States. That's kind of the interesting part of this.
Yeah, they are a different country with their own set of principles and objectives and interests. Certainly, they are in the Middle East. We are simply in the Middle East through proxy and military bases, and I guess the CIA, but we don't live that reality every day. It just feels like with all of the domestic issues happening right now, that this war just adds to the level of stress and strife that everyday Americans are feeling in terms of, and it's not that Trump can just automatically fix all of this. I want everybody to understand, Trump can't snap his fingers and fix the housing market. You know what I mean? But it feels like another issue added on to the large quantity of issues that everyday Americans are facing. And while they may be, I don't think Americans writ large, like you were saying, citing the polling earlier, support this war. I do believe that it's not, besides the gas prices, this is not impacting anybody in the mainland United States in any real tangible way quite yet. And I think the turning point in that perception, even with the polling, would be boots on the ground. And I don't mean a large-scale deployment of United States Army, Marines, whoever, like we saw in Iraq in the early 2000s. I even think a small number of specialized troops would kind of be like, hey, what's the deal here? I thought Israel and the United States were going to conduct these airstrikes. They've already taken out the leader of Iran, an 86-year-old man, and they've left a power vacuum in the country. And I thought that was the mission objective. Now, we're still waiting on all of that, but I think boots on the ground would signal that we are going to be in this for longer than initially sold. And I think the American public would have a big problem with that. And I think no matter how you feel about the Iranian government or our own government, I think the American people would have a serious issue with that. And one of the other things, actually, go ahead and jump in here. Let me reclaim my thought, but I did have one more point to make.
Yeah, I think one thing that nobody has really talked about yet is the longer that this goes on, and I'm not talking about like the international community in terms of like protests, but I'm talking about the economic international community here. So I mentioned earlier that a very, very large portion of the world's oil travels through this region. And most of it who would be affected in terms of shortages and whatnot would be countries to the east. And some of those are very much our allies, including Japan, Australia, a lot of Oceania, Southeast Asia kind of deal. So what we are primed, when I say we, I'm talking about the United States. The United States is primed. They need to get this conflict. They need to achieve their goals as quickly as possible, because we talk about how it's potentially going to affect us and gas prices, and that's going to basically increase other goods prices as well with it. It's kind of this snowball effect, is that at least we have these oil reserves. We develop our own oil. I guarantee you, if worse came to worse, we would probably take some oil from Venezuela. That's just me making a bold, uneducated claim there. But that wouldn't surprise me. But I could see a lot of countries in Asia, an Oceania region there, that will be impacted more heavily by this, and they will start to have diplomatic pressure on the United States to have an end to this conflict. I don't know what the number is, but I guarantee you, I agree with you. I don't think this is going to be something that's going to be figured out by like Wednesday or something like that. But I would say if we are still in this conflict into April, it's going to be a problem.
I would say it's highly likely at this moment in time that that scenario will play out. And the last point I want to end on here, just for me, is that I believe Trump said the other day that he doesn't necessarily care if the new president or leader of Iran is religious or non-religious, which signals to me that he is willing to take a leader or it would be acceptable for him to have a leader of Iran that is still a member of the current setup in the Iranian government. Like, he wants somebody who is amicable to him, which he felt like the Ayatollah and other leaders in Iran are, or they weren't toward him, which is why they were beefing constantly. When they overthrew Nicolas Maduro and captured him, they replaced him with Delcy Rodriguez, who's now the president, I guess, for lack of a better term, of Venezuela. And that is, so far, been a friendly regime to the United States. I think they have an understanding with one another, the U.S. government and the Venezuelan government. And Trump has praised her repeatedly throughout the media. So her name is Delcy Rodriguez. Now, she was still a member of Nicolas Maduro's party, and I think that situation can inform a lot about what the objectives of this situation are, specifically when it comes to Donald Trump and maybe Marco Rubio, in that it would be overly ambitious to topple the entire Iranian government and create a situation for a revolution, for the citizenry to rise up and create a new ruling government in Iran. I think they are willing to... I think they're kind of biding time right now to see who Iran selects as their next leader, because maybe that person will be more inclined to play ball with the United States and Israel and that alliance. Instead of just full-out regime change, we topple the government and we set some other puppet thing up. And it still would be quote-unquote puppet. I guess you can get into the weeds of all of that, but I think that's kind of what they're aiming for at the moment.
I think that's accurate. I agree with that, because a complete regime change is too much instability and something worse can come from it. I'm not saying the current regime change is ideal, or I should say the current regime is ideal, but I agree. I think the goal is to find somebody that's more amicable and who wants to play ball. It's like, hey, we'll let it be. Let you do your thing. We don't. I think for the most part, it is based on the diplomatic relations and what you can offer us. And if you're not willing to do that, we'll find somebody else that will. Yeah, I agree. I do think that is the ultimate goal. And I think that's why, despite these attacks, I don't want to call them, they are a softer approach compared to many other routes to achieve potentially the same goal. We'll just have to wait and see if Iran will have that candidate that is willing to play ball.
Last thing I'll say is that I think our audience should be aware that the next country, and I don't bet on Kalshi, and I honestly think it's a little dark for people to do this. So this is not an endorsement to do this. I just want to be very clear. But I think the next government, I think the United States, Cuba, the Cuban government may be in its final stretch here as currently constituted. I think Marco Rubio is laser focused on that after he, quote unquote, after they get the Iran situation figured out. There are mass gas shortages, gasoline, and energy shortages in Cuba. And I think the Trump foreign policy strategy, if you take Russia and Ukraine out of it, China, the tariff stuff, that's all kind of a little different. But specifically with the I don't mean this in an insulting way, but I'll say the B tier adversaries coming into his administration, Cuba, Iran is probably like one B more than just a B, and Venezuela. They're taking a broad, sweeping, we're just going to go for it. We're going for it, and that's the decision they made, and we'll live with that. It seemingly worked out in Venezuela. We don't know about Cuba, but I could almost guarantee you something's going to happen there. And then we are watching it play out in Iran right now. And Iran is the most powerful one of these countries, and that is why it's so deeply concerning that we come out on the other side of this with minimal deaths, not only for United States service members, but also the Iranian citizenry. So I just want to put that out there. But Cuba could be the next domino in play.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Definitely could. But it's one domino at a time with our regime right now. So, but you know what? I think we talked about the main points with Iran, with all the delicate landmines that's around it. I don't think we stepped on any one of them. So hey, kudos to us on that. But if there's any relevant updates and information, we definitely want to continue to keep an eye on this. It's just extremely difficult to give an accurate assessment of what exactly is going on over there, and I think every single person that has an interest in it or has looked in it to themselves can probably agree with us, where they go through a search and they really don't learn a whole lot new besides what is being told through us in media outlets, because, hey, I don't trust social media right now on this topic. But I was going to say, do you have anything you wanted to add on to any of our topics? Or I think...
No, I think in regards to Iran, I would say just stay diligent in following accurate news sources. Don't make yourself paranoid by over-consuming alternative media with an agenda to sell you, even if you believe legacy and mainstream outlets also are selling you a certain form of propaganda. I would just say temper your media diet. And there's a lot of propaganda flying around right now. Just be diligent in how you consume your media. And ultimately, again, just hope for a minimal loss of life in this situation. As far as football goes, on a lighter note, to get off a very heavy and very, very serious topic, I would say everybody look forward to more free agency and draft talk. I know Logan and I are probably going to be very into this draft this year, and it's also interesting because quarterback is the quarterbacks are so limited this year. After Fernando Mendoza, maybe you have Ty Simpson go in the first round, but it's interesting because there's so many other quality players at so many other important positions that these guys are really going to get a spotlight, when I feel like sometimes the quarterbacks just take over the discourse regarding the NFL draft. So we're going to be able to highlight more dudes who are linebackers, defensive ends, offensive linemen. There's probably going to be a running back that goes in the first round that doesn't happen very often. You have some decent wide receivers. So just be ready for more of that kind of coverage in the NFL offseason. And we've talked some NBA a little bit. I'd probably like to get your thoughts on the World Baseball Classic, and not that you're watching it, but more on the event as a whole and how I feel like it's kind of taken a hold in ways that it had not previously done, and it feels a little more legitimate than maybe it did 10 years ago. And I think that it's very interesting to see how these large-scale international events happen, because they created out of thin air, essentially. So I'd like to get your take on that. But other than that, folks, subscribe, go ahead and share this if you can. We will be back next week, regularly scheduled programming, and hopefully we'll have more information on a variety of topics.
Have a good weekend, everybody.